Picture this: you've just finished what you thought was the perfect space opera trilogy, only to discover the author has written a fourth book that completely shatters everything you believed about heroic narratives. What if I told you there's a science fiction novel that takes every expectation you have about good triumphing over evil and burns it to ash in the most brutal, beautiful way possible? Today, we're diving deep into Pierce Brown's Dark Age, a book that literally broke the internet when it was released because readers couldn't handle the emotional devastation it delivered. I'm going to take you through this literary masterpiece that redefined what science fiction could accomplish. We'll explore why this book made grown adults weep openly, why it's considered one of the most brutal sequels ever written, and how Pierce Brown managed to create a story so viscerally intense that it left readers questioning everything they thought they knew about storytelling itself. This isn't just another space adventure. This is a psychological warfare manual disguised as entertainment. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why Dark Age has become the gold standard for dark science fiction, why it's simultaneously the most hated and most beloved book in its series, and how it manages to be both completely hopeless and oddly inspiring at the same time. Whether you're a long-time fan or completely new to this universe, prepare yourself for a journey into one of the most unforgiving narratives ever committed to paper. Dark Age represents Pierce Brown's magnum opus within his Red Rising saga, standing as the fifth installment in what began as a dystopian young adult trilogy before evolving into something far more complex and mature. Published in 2019, this novel marked a dramatic shift in tone and scope that left readers fundamentally changed by the experience. Brown didn't simply write another sequel, he crafted a literary earthquake that demolished the foundation readers had built their expectations upon. The book exists within a universe where humanity has colonized the solar system, divided into a rigid, color-coded hierarchy that determines every aspect of existence. What started as Darrow's personal quest for vengeance has now exploded into a galaxy-spanning war that threatens to consume everything in its path. Dark Age picks up 10 years after the events of Iron Gold, finding our beloved characters as scattered across different worlds, fighting separate battles while the larger conflict spirals beyond anyone's control. This novel represents Brown's commitment to realistic consequence in storytelling. Unlike many science fiction epics that protect their heroes through plot armor, Dark Age subjects every character to the genuine possibility of failure, suffering, and death. The author made a conscious decision to explore what happens when revolution succeeds, but the aftermath proves more challenging than the original oppression. It's a meditation on power, corruption, and the price of idealism in an unforgiving universe. The book operates on multiple narrative threads, following different characters through their individual hells while slowly building toward convergences that feel both inevitable and shocking. Brown's writing matured significantly by this point, incorporating complex political machinations, psychological depth, and philosophical questions about the nature of progress and sacrifice. Dark Age opens in a universe teetering on the edge of complete chaos. The society that once maintained order through oppression has fractured, but the replacement hasn't brought the peace Darrow and his allies fought to achieve. Instead, multiple factions wage brutal warfare across planets and moons, while innocent populations suffer the consequences of their leaders' ambitions. The Iron Gold Republic, which was supposed to represent freedom and equality, finds itself struggling to maintain cohesion as external enemies and internal corruption threaten its survival. Darrow, once known as the Reaper and hero of the revolution, now leads military campaigns that grow increasingly desperate and morally ambiguous. His decisions carry the weight of billions of lives, while his enemies adapt and counter his strategies with ruthless efficiency. Meanwhile, his wife Mustang governs the Republic while facing political challenges that threaten to tear apart everything they've built together. Ephraim, Lysander, and other perspective characters navigate their own treacherous paths through this fractured landscape. Each storyline explores different aspects of survival, loyalty, and the corruption that power inevitably brings. The novel refuses to offer simple solutions or clear moral victories, instead presenting a world where every choice carries devastating consequences and where good intentions frequently lead to horrific outcomes. The Sovereign, Darrow's nemesis, orchestrates a campaign of psychological warfare designed not just to defeat the Republic militarily, but to destroy the hope and idealism that sparked the revolution. This isn't simply about territory or resources anymore, it's about the fundamental question of whether human nature can transcend its worst impulses when given the opportunity for meaningful change. The Siege of Mercury stands as one of the novel's most harrowing sequences, where Darrow leads a desperate assault against impossible odds. This battle represents everything wrong with the current state of warfare in their universe, as tactical brilliance becomes meaningless against overwhelming enemy resources and preparation. Brown uses this extended sequence to demonstrate how war has evolved beyond individual heroism into something resembling industrial-scale slaughter. The siege forces Darrow to make decisions that compromise his moral principles, while highlighting how leadership in wartime requires choosing between different types of failure. Ephraim's journey from drug-addicted thief to reluctant hero provides one of the book's most compelling character arcs. His storyline begins in the depths of Luna's criminal underworld, where he's barely surviving through theft and substance abuse. When circumstances force him to become involved in a kidnapping plot, he discovers reserves of courage and decency he didn't know he possessed. His transformation occurs gradually and believably, showing how ordinary people can rise to extraordinary challenges when circumstances demand growth. The complexity of his relationships with both criminals and victims illustrates Brown's talent for creating morally ambiguous situations where clear right and wrong answers don't exist. Lysander's evolution from naive idealist to calculating political player represents one of the most unsettling character developments in the series. Raised with noble intentions, but gradually corrupted by exposure to realpolitik, he begins making choices that prioritize effectiveness over morality. His relationship with the Sovereign exposes him to manipulation techniques that slowly reshape his worldview, turning his genuine desire to help people into justification for increasingly authoritarian measures. This storyline serves as a cautionary tale about how good people can become complicit in evil systems when they convince themselves they're serving a greater good. The Republic's internal political crisis reveals how revolutionary ideals struggle against practical governance challenges. Mustang's attempts to maintain democratic principles while managing a war economy create impossible dilemmas that test her character and relationships. The novel explores how wartime pressures naturally push governments toward authoritarian solutions, even when leaders genuinely want to preserve freedom and equality. Brown demonstrates how external threats can be used to justify internal repression, showing how democracies can die not through conquest, but through the gradual erosion of principles. Virginia's capture and imprisonment creates one of the book's most emotionally devastating sequences. Her physical and psychological torture serves not merely as shock value, but as exploration of how totalitarian systems attempt to break their opponents' spirits before destroying their bodies. The scenes refuse to glorify suffering, while honestly depicting the reality of what political prisoners endure. Her resilience and eventual escape demonstrate both human capacity for endurance and the importance of maintaining hope in seemingly hopeless circumstances. The betrayals that occur throughout the novel systematically dismantle the trust that held the Republic together. Characters who seemed loyal reveal hidden agendas or succumb to pressure in ways that feel both surprising and inevitable. These betrayals aren't simple plot twists, but logical consequences of the impossible pressures these characters face. Brown shows how war and desperation can corrupt even the most principled individuals, forcing readers to question whether anyone can maintain their integrity under extreme circumstances. Roque's posthumous influence through his writings and followers creates a haunting presence throughout the novel. Though dead, his ideas about honour and sacrifice continue shaping events in ways that complicate the moral landscape. His legacy demonstrates how intellectual and cultural victories can outlast military defeats, showing that wars are ultimately fought over competing visions of what civilization should become. The book's climactic convergence brings multiple storylines together in a sequence that feels both cathartic and devastating. Characters who have been separated for hundreds of pages finally reunite under circumstances that test everything they've learned about themselves and each other. The resolution doesn't provide easy answers or comfortable closure, but instead sets up even greater challenges while honouring the growth that these characters have experienced. That personal integrity becomes exponentially more difficult to maintain when wielding significant power over others' lives. Dark Age demonstrates repeatedly how good intentions can lead to terrible outcomes when leaders become isolated from the consequences of their decisions. The novel shows that maintaining moral principles requires constant vigilance and willingness to accept limitations rather than pursuing effectiveness at any cost. Characters who compromise their values incrementally find themselves eventually unrecognizable from their former selves, suggesting that ethical boundaries must be defended absolutely rather than adjusted pragmatically. Revolutionary movements face their greatest test not during the struggle for power, but in the aftermath of victory. The book illustrates how overthrowing an oppressive system doesn't automatically create a better one, especially when the revolutionaries lack experience in governance and face external threats that pressure them towards authoritarian solutions. Building something new requires different skills than destroying something old, and former rebels often struggle with the transition from opposition to leadership roles. War fundamentally changes everyone it touches, regardless of their initial moral orientation or intended role in the conflict. Dark Age shows how exposure to violence and life or death decision making reshapes personality and priorities in ways that can't be easily undone. Characters enter conflicts believing they can maintain their humanity while achieving their objectives, but discover that survival often requires choices that compromise their self-image and relationships. Trust becomes both more valuable and more fragile under extreme stress, creating paradoxes that define many character relationships throughout the novel. People need allies to survive impossible circumstances, but those same circumstances create pressures that can turn allies into enemies. The book explores how desperation can make even loyal individuals unreliable, while showing that some bonds can survive even the most severe testing. Leadership during crisis requires accepting responsibility for outcomes beyond any individual's control or prediction. The novel's leaders constantly face situations where all available options carry significant risks and negative consequences, forcing them to make decisions based on incomplete information while accepting blame for results they couldn't fully anticipate. This creates a psychological burden that gradually wears down even the strongest personalities. Systemic oppression creates wounds that persist long after the oppressive system has been dismantled. Characters who grew up under the colour system continue struggling with internalised hierarchies and trauma responses that complicate their attempts to build egalitarian relationships. The book suggests that true social change requires not just political revolution, but generational healing processes that address psychological and cultural damage. Information warfare and propaganda can be more effective than military force in determining conflict outcomes. The novel shows how controlling narratives and manipulating public perception can turn populations against their own interests or leaders. Characters who ignore the importance of communication and messaging find their military victories negated by political defeats. Survival often requires choosing between competing loyalties, forcing individuals to prioritize some relationships and values over others. The book presents numerous scenarios where characters can't protect everyone they care about simultaneously, creating moral dilemmas that have no clearly correct solutions. These choices reveal character depths, while acknowledging the heroism sometimes means accepting tragic losses. Personal growth through trauma isn't automatic or always positive, requiring conscious effort to channel suffering into wisdom rather than bitterness. Several characters demonstrate how similar experiences can lead to completely different outcomes, depending on how individuals process and respond to their challenges. The novel shows that resilience is a skill that must be developed rather than an innate trait. Understanding opposing viewpoints becomes crucial for effective leadership, even when those viewpoints seem morally reprehensible. Characters who dismiss their enemies as simply evil consistently underestimate them and make strategic errors, while those who study their opponents' motivations and methods prove more effective in countering them. Dark Age stands as a monument to ambitious storytelling that refuses to compromise its vision for comfortable entertainment. Pierce Brown created something genuinely rare in science fiction, a sequel that enhances rather than diminishes everything that came before it. The novel succeeds because it treats its characters as real people facing impossible circumstances, rather than action figures moving through predetermined plot points. This book will challenge every assumption you have about heroic narratives and satisfying conclusions. It's simultaneously the most brutal and most honest entry in its series, presenting warfare and politics with unflinching realism while maintaining hope that meaningful change remains possible, even in the darkest circumstances. Brown's willingness to subject beloved characters to genuine consequences creates emotional investment that transcends typical genre boundaries. Dark Age proves that science fiction can tackle serious philosophical questions about power, corruption, and human nature without sacrificing entertainment value. It's a masterclass in how to escalate stakes while developing characters, how to maintain multiple complex plotlines without losing narrative focus, and how to create genuine surprises that feel inevitable in retrospect. Whether you're seeking intellectual stimulation or emotional catharsis, this novel delivers both in devastating abundance. This is essential reading for anyone interested in mature science fiction that treats its audience with respect and intelligence.